Town over there ought to yield both conveyance and food as well as information concerning those he sought. He would catch them. They could never get away from him. He was on their track again, though hours behind. He would get them yet, and no man should take his reward from him. Almost spent, he came at last to the village, and ate a surprisingly large dish of beef and vegetable stew at the quaint little house where Celia and Gordon had breakfasted. But the old lady who served it to them was shy about talking, and though admitting that a couple of people had been there that morning, she was non-committal about their appearance. They might have been young and good-looking and worn feathers in their hats, and they might not. She wasn't one for noticing people's appearance if they treated her civilly and paid their bills. Would he have another cup of coffee? He would, and also 2 more pieces of pie, but he got very little further information. It was over at the corner store, where he finally went in search of something stronger than coffee, that he further pursued his investigations. The loungers were still there. It was their only business in life, and they were most diligent in it. They eyed the newcomer with a relish, and settled back on their various barrels and boxes to enjoy whatever entertainment the gods were about to provide to relieve their monotonous existence. A house divided against itself cannot stand. This man's elegant garments, assumed for the nonce, did not fit the rest of his general appearance, which had been accentuated by his long, hot, dusty tramp. The high evening hat was jammed on the back of his head and bore a decided dent where it had rolled down the cinder embankment. His collar was wilted and lifeless, his white laundered tie at half-mast, his coat awry, and his fine patent leather shoes, which pinched, were covered with dust, and had caused a limp like the hardest tramp upon the road. Moreover, the speech of the man betrayed him, and the keen-minded old gossips who were watching him suspiciously sized him up at once the minute he opened his mouth. "Saw anything of a couple of young folks walking down this way?" he inquired casually, pausing to light a cigar with which he was reinforcing himself for further travel. One man allowed that there might have passed such people that day. He hardly seemed willing to commit himself, but another vouchsafed the information that Joe here drove 2 parties of that description to Milton this morning. Just got back. Maybe he could answer for 'em." Joe frowned. He did not like the looks of the thick-set man. He still remembered the forget-me-not eyes. But the stranger made instant request to be driven to Milton, offering $10 for the same when he found that his driver was reluctant, and that Milton was a railroad center. A few keen questions had made him sure that his man had gone to Milton. Joe haggled, allowed his horse was tired, and he didn't care about the trip twice in one day, but finally agreed to take the man for $15, and sauntered off to get a fresh horse. He had no mind to be in a hurry. He had his own opinion about letting those 2 parties get out of the way before the third put in an appearance. But he had no mind to lose the $15. It would help to buy the ring he coveted for his girl. In due time, Joe rode leisurely up, and the impatient traveler climbed into the high spring wagon and was driven away from the apathetic gaze of the country loungers, who unblinkingly took in the fact that Joe was headed toward Asheville, and evidently intended taking his fare to Milton by way of that village, a 30-mile drive at least. The man would get the worth of his money and ride. A grim twinkle sat in their several eyes as the spring wagon turned the curve in the road and was lost to sight, and after due silence an old stager spoke. "Do you reckon that was their chauffeur?" he requested languidly. "Nah," replied a farmer's son vigorously. "He wouldn't try to chauffe all dolled up like that. He's the rich dad comin' after the runaways. Joe don't intend he shall get 'em a while yet. I reckon the ceremony'll be over before he steps in to interfere." This lad went twice a month to Milton to the movies, and was regarded as an authority on matters of romance. A pause showed that his theory had taken root in the minds of his auditors. "Well, I reckon Joe thinks the longest way round is the shortest way home," declared the old stager. "Joe never did like them codfish swells, but how do you account for the style of that gal? She wa'n't like her dad one little bit." "Oh, she's been to college, I suppose," declared the youth. They get all that off in college." "Serves the old man right for sending his gal to a fool college when she ought to 'a' been home learning to housekeep. I hope she gets off with her young man all right," said a grim old lounger, and a cackle of laughter went round the group, which presently broke up, for this had been a strenuous day, and all felt their need of rest. Besides, they wanted to get home and tell the news before some neighbor got ahead of them. All this time Celia and Gordon were touring Milton, serenely unconscious of danger near, or guardian angel of the name Joe. Investigation disclosed the fact that there was a train for Pittsburgh about 3 in the afternoon. Gordon sent a code telegram to his chief, assuring him of the safety of the message, and of his own intention to proceed to Washington as fast as steam could carry him. Then he took the girl to a restaurant, where they mounted 2 high stools, and partook with an unusually ravenous appetite of nearly everything on the menu: corn, soup, roast beef, baked trout, stewed tomatoes, coleslaw, custard, apple and mince pies, with a cup of good country coffee and real cream, all for 25 cents apiece. It was a very merry meal. Celia felt somehow as if for the time all memory of the past had been taken from her, and she were free to think and act happily in the present, without any great problems to solve or decisions to make. Just 2 young people off having a good time they were, at least until that afternoon train came. After their dinner they took a short walk to a tiny park where 2 white ducks disported themselves on a 7x9 pond, spanned by a rustic bridge where lovers had cut their initials. Gordon took out his knife and idly cut C.H. in the rough bark of the upper rail, while his companion sat on the little board seat and watched him. She was pondering over the fact that he had cut her initials and not his own. It would have been like the George of old to cut his own and never once think of hers. And he had put but 1 H. Probably thought of her now as Celia Hayne, without the Hathaway, or else he was so used to writing her name Celia Hathaway that he was not thinking at all. Those letters! How they haunted her and clouded every bright experience that she fain would have grasped and held for a little hour. They were silent now while he worked, and she thought. He had finished the C.H. and was cutting another C, but instead of making another H, he carefully carved out the letter G. What was that for? C.G.? Who was C.G.? Oh, how stupid! George, of course. He had started a C by mistake. But he did not add the expected H. Instead, he snapped his knife shut, laid his hand over the carving, and leaned over the rail. "Sometime, perhaps, we'll come here again and remember," he said, and then bethought him that he had no right to hope for any such anniversary. "Oh!" She looked up into his eyes, startled, troubled, the haunting of her fears in the shadows of the blue. He looked down into them and read her trouble, read and understood, and looked back his great desire to comfort her. His look carried further than he meant it should. For the 3rd time that day a thrill of wonder and delight passed over her, and left her fearful with the strange joy that she felt she should put from her. It was only an instant, that look, but it brought the bright color to both faces, and made Gordon feel the immediate necessity of changing the subject. "See those little fishes down there," he said, pointing to the tiny lake below them. Through a blur of tears the girl looked down and saw the tiny, sharp-finned creatures darting here and there in a beam of sun like a small searchlight set to show them off. She moved her hand on the rail to lean further over, and her soft fingers touched his hand for a moment. She would not draw them away quickly, lest she hurt him. Why, she did not know, but she could not, would not hurt him. Not now. The 2 hands lay side by side for a full minute, and the touch to Gordon was as if a rose leaf had kissed his soul. He had never felt anything sweeter. He longed to gather the little hand into his clasp, and feel its pulses trembling there, as he had felt it in the church the night before. But she was not his. He would not touch her till she had had her choice of what to do, and she would never choose him, never, when she knew how he had deceived her. That one supreme moment they had of perfect consciousness